Three college students, named Nick, TJ, and Lawrence, were all visiting Paris as a way to celebrate the ending of their first semester of their senior year. TJ had an aunt who lived in Paris, and he worked out a small vacation trip where he and his three friends could stay in their guest house for 2 weeks over winter break. TJ and Nick would both say that the first week was the best week of their lives, but it was quickly followed by the worst. While in Paris, the three students saw as many sights as they could, and TJ's family made sure to show them their favorite places to eat and spend time during the day. Toward the end of their first week in the city, TJ's uncle suggested that the boys go and visit the catacombs during one of their days in the upcoming week. This was something that sparked interest in all three of them, and sure enough they began looking into the tours that are given out throughout some portions of the catacombs, and figured out a time that would work best for them to go. From there, that was all they could talk about. The three began looking into information about the catacombs, and even began freaking each other out with some old scary stories about hauntings in the tunnels. When the day came, Lawrence, Nick, and TJ made sure to get the tour group's location early in the day, as it's a popular attraction, so the groups fill up quickly and the wait time can become pretty long. After waiting for a little while, wondering if they should ask someone if they're in the right spot, the three noticed a man walking toward them who seemed to almost be flagging them down. As the man, who was wearing a reflective yellow jacket, approached the students, he introduced himself as Dennis. There was a bit of a language barrier between Dennis and the students, but after a moment they figured out that he was trying to tell them that he was their tour guide. Now, they thought it was a bit odd that they wouldn't be able to understand their tour guide of the catacombs, but they just shrugged it off, and after Dennis told them that the tour would only cost them 29 euros, the men obliged and were excited to get the tour started, and even more excited that they were the only ones in the group. That's something that they never expected to happen. As the tour began, Dennis brought the three students down into the catacombs, and they had a great time. The tour lasted about an hour, and the three students were sad to see it come to an end, but they had actually bonded quite a bit with their newly acquainted tour guide. As they were saying their goodbyes and thanking Dennis for the great tour, they were surprised to learn that this was actually the end of his shift. And that was when Dennis asked them if they would want to grab a bite to eat with him, and this made Nick, TJ, and Lawrence feel great. They felt as if they had made a new friend in a new part of the world, plus they loved the idea of grabbing some lunch. Dennis took the three to a small cafe where they grabbed a small bite and a drink. This was where he began to explain to the trio that they had only seen a small portion of the catacombs. As it turns out, the portion of the catacombs that is used for touring is only about 2 kilometers long, which meant there's a large portion of the catacombs that were closed off to the public. Well, as it turned out, Dennis knew how to access these closed off portions and was willing to run a late night tour for his three new friends for double the price that they had paid him for their earlier tour. He explained that this was because of the risk that he took, and that he could lose his job if the four of them got caught. The three students looked at each other and came to the unanimous decision that exploring the forbidden part of the catacombs would be the perfect way to spend the last few days of their trip. After the group finished their meal, they agreed on a time and place that they would meet Dennis that night, and then they went their separate ways. Nick, Lawrence, and TJ went back to his aunt's guest house to relax for a few hours and spend some time with TJ's family. They agreed not to tell them about their plans later, as TJ knew that his aunt and uncle wouldn't approve of them trespassing. But after spending a couple of hours with them, the three were able to head back to the guest house and begin getting ready. The catacombs were particularly cold, so the trio made sure that they dressed warm and brought an ample amount of water and flashlights. As the time grew closer to 11:30 that night, TJ, Lawrence, and Nick decided to head out and begin making their way toward the meeting spot that Dennis had told them about. By the time they had gotten there, it was just after midnight, and they could see Dennis right away. However, instead of wearing reflective yellow clothing like the last time, this time he was wearing all dark clothing and a large black sweatshirt and jacket. He greeted his new friends, and after a few short moments the group began sneaking their way down into the catacombs. They didn't go in a typical entrance like last time, and instead, Dennis brought the boys to a small manhole that had been propped open. He slowly explained to them that this was a portion of the catacombs that was usually sealed off, but the city of Paris was conducting a research project that allowed them to open the manhole. Dennis and his other associates weren't even supposed to know about it, but when they found out, he was more than happy to look into it. The idea of slipping into a manhole set the group of students on edge. However, they all knew that they wanted to go exploring, and one by one they slowly entered the catacombs. With their flashlights on, They could see all of the details in the stone, skull, and bone-covered tunnels, and to them it was truly something out of an old Gothic novel. Dennis was just as charismatic of a tour guide as he had been previously in the day, and the group was thoroughly enjoying themselves as they moved deeper and deeper into the abyss. Nick would say that he had felt some concern brewing in his gut as the group made their way deeper into the catacombs. The more turns that they made down the tunnel, the more confused that he got, and he was honestly afraid that the group might not be able to make it back to the surface. He expressed this concern with the group, and instead of being reassured by Dennis, it appeared as if Dennis's entire mood had shifted. He stopped in his tracks, turned to Lawrence, Nick, and TJ, and shined the light right in their face. Right then and there, the three students knew that something was very wrong. This was when Dennis pulled out a large knife from his jacket pocket and shined the light down on it quickly for the group to see. He began to tell them that they most likely wouldn't be making it out of the catacombs, at least not unless they did exactly what he said. The trio tried to laugh it off, but soon realized that their new friend that they thought they had made was being very serious. Dennis began instructing the group to give him everything that they had in their pockets. This would include their wallets, cell phones, flashlights, and anything else that they had. He didn't stop there, though. Dennis then demanded that the group give him their jackets and their shoes. When they showed signs of not wanting to give up the only things that were keeping them somewhat warm, their guide quickly reminded them of the knife that he was holding and would tell them that they aren't the first group that he left behind because they wouldn't listen. They stopped resisting right then and there, and they gave up their jackets, hoodies, and shoes in hopes of at least being guided out of the tunnel. After Dennis got everything that he wanted from the group, he told them to face the wall, close their eyes, and though they were confused, TJ, Nick, and Lawrence listened to the demand. After a few seconds of standing with their faces against the walls, they heard the one thing they feared almost as much as dying in the catacombs. Dennis was running off without them. The three reacted immediately and tried to chase after him, but as soon as he turned a corner, his light began to fade and the trio was left in total darkness. Panic had begun to set in almost immediately as the three students began to wonder how they would make it out of this situation alive. No one knew where they were, and they had no way of getting in touch with anyone. Within a few moments, the cold had started to get to Nick and Lawrence. TJ was doing his best to ignore the cold as he focused on how he might get them out of the catacombs. After discussing a few ideas between the group, they figured that they would head in the last direction that they heard Dennis running, touching the walls the entire way in hopes of finding the right way out. They knew that this was going to be a near impossible task, but they figured that this was their best shot. The boys wandered for what seemed like hours before giving up. They felt as if they had made no progress and had no way of telling if they were even going in the right direction. They collapsed and huddled together to maintain what little warmth they could, and all they could do from that point on was hope that someone on the surface managed to somehow find them. As the next day came, TJ's aunt and uncle were beginning to worry about their nephew and his friends when they didn't see them in the morning, and after checking the guest house and seeing that there was no sign of the boys, they decided to contact the authorities. This didn't do much for them, though, as the police didn't have the slightest inkling or idea of where to begin looking for the trio. Meanwhile, Nick, TJ, and Lawrence were in for a long and cold day in the catacombs. An entire day had passed, and there was still no sign of the college students, and their families back home had all been notified of their disappearance. Everyone was at a loss as what they could do to help. Lucky for the boys, they had unknowingly wandered around aimlessly and ended up in one of the best places that they could while being trapped in the catacombs. You see, when Dennis explained to TJ, Lawrence, and Nick why that section of the catacombs was open, he mentioned a research team. And while that was entirely false, what he had neglected to mention was that some sections of the catacombs act as a home for some of the homeless people who have learned to live life underneath the city of Paris. And while Dennis never would have expected his victims to run into someone while surrounded by total darkness, it turned out he was wrong. 2 days after the three college students were left for dead in the darkness of the catacombs, Nick and TJ were delighted to hear the sound of footsteps. The two began yelling with what little voices that they had left for help, and it wasn't long before they were discovered and taken to the surface. Nick and TJ were brought to the nearest hospital and were treated for hypothermia and dehydration. Lawrence sadly didn't make it out of the catacombs with his life. After examining his body, It was determined that he most likely died of a heart attack while his body was in a weakened state from the hypothermia and dehydration. According to Nick and TJ, Lawrence claimed he was feeling tired after what was most likely a day of being trapped, and after a little while, he stopped responding to their questions. While they had suspected that their friend had passed on, they hoped that he was simply in a deep sleep and would wake up when they were saved. He sadly never did. Dennis was never found, and it would turn out that no one that was permitted to be giving tours in the catacombs went by that name or matched his description. It's likely that he will never be caught or tried for leaving the three students for dead.